When you think of PlayStation games that have some of the best visuals, there are likely a few titles that immediately come to mind. For many of you, it might be any number of Squaresoft's late 90s hits, whether that be Final Fantasy IX's storybook come-to-life aesthetic, Chrono Cross's dreamlike tropical island vibes, or the more mature and darker gothic style found in Vagrant Story. Others might prefer titles that utilize the console's power for stunning 2D visuals or for a mix of 2D and 3D, with games like Breath of Fire 4, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, or Capcom's Strider 2. And then there are titles like the Mega Man Legends games, whose cartoonish 3D style is powered by some excellent texture work for an aesthetic that still holds up wonderfully to this day. We could spend all day discussing great-looking PlayStation games, and there's certainly enough meat on that bone to fill an entire video here. But today, I want to focus on one particular game that likely went under the radar for a lot of people, and not without good reason. It's a title that many of us never would have actually had the chance to experience, and belonging to a franchise that, while undoubtedly significant, never really got its proper due in many parts of the world. It's Dr. Slump, the 1999 PlayStation release from Bandai. Now, for those of you that are more anime inclined, or for those who at least saw that one episode of Dragon Ball Super, you may recognize this as one of the late great Akira Toriyama's other series, his first major hit before the creation of Dragon Ball. While this series was wildly successful and influential domestically within Japan, it never truly seemed to get its due on the international stage. Whether that's a result of the era of its release, the nature of localizing Japanese comedy, or just a classic case of rights holders being difficult to work with, it's hard to know exactly where the blame lies here. And this focus on domestic markets fully extends to this PlayStation adaptation because, as you might expect, this was one of those titles that never saw release outside of Japan. However, despite being a Japanese exclusive, it did receive a fan translation a few years back, thanks to the excellent work of translator HilltopWorks, who I feel really deserves some recognition here. Seriously, I wasn't familiar with their game, but they've put in some real work in translating some lesser-known bangers that were on my own personal list of games to play, including Square's racing RPG Racing Lagoon, and the PlayStation adventure game Aconcagua, a title that is a bit of a mouthful and I'm not totally sure I'm actually pronouncing right. I don't know this translator personally or anything, but I've included a link to their Patreon in the video description for anyone that might want to show some support or just check out some of their other work. Anyway, the Dr. Slump franchise has many forms and adaptations, such as the original manga series, an anime adaptation from the 80s with over 200 episodes titled Dr. Slump Arale-chan, and various movies, but this PlayStation release is specifically based off of the 1997 anime remake series just titled Dr. Slump. And while this will probably sound like sacrilege to any devoted slumpers watching, I've gotta say, I really love the look of this 97 series. It immediately brings to mind the art style of Dragon Ball GT, which, while admittedly that might be a bit of a dangerous comparison, is a look that I'm really fond of when compared to the classic 80s series. Even our main character, Arale, has a redesign that looks great in my opinion, even if it is a bit of a departure from her original overalls look. Now, while this 1999 release wasn't the first or even the last video game adaptation of the Dr. Slump franchise, in some ways I think you could consider this to be the definitive adaptation, or at least pretty close to it. Throughout the 80s, there were a number of Dr. Slump releases across consoles and home computers, as well as this somewhat mind-boggling adaptation released for the Nintendo DS years later in 2008. Seriously, it seems like most people who have tried this one struggle to figure out what you're even supposed to be doing. Arale herself has even been featured and playable in a variety of the Shonen Jump crossover games like Jump Superstars and J-Stars Victory Versus. But from what I can tell, all of these adaptations and cameos have been based off of the original 80s series. This PlayStation game may be the only video game adaptation to draw inspiration from that 97 remake series, which does make me wonder if, like Dragon Ball GT itself, if this remake series might be something of a black sheep in the franchise. It's a real shame if so, because despite its choice of source material for this game, I think this PlayStation release probably does the best job of doing this series justice. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about this game or the Dr. Slump series in general before going into this. I mean, I knew that Dr. Slump was a thing, and I knew from a few clips I'd seen previously that the game looked visually incredible, but beyond that, I didn't even know how the game actually played. And I've gotta say, it's a little unique. I'm really not sure what genre I'd say it belongs to, but let me give my best effort here to put this game into words. See, the best way that I can describe Dr. Slump as a game is, imagine that you're playing through 7 episodes of a comedy anime. And that's it. Seriously, playing Dr. Slump, it really felt like the developer's mission statement was to try and emulate the show as closely as possible while obviously working within the confines of a video game. This is not a licensed anime game that has some forced gameplay loop with light theming wrapped around it. No, this is a game that really seems to try and capture the heart of what the Dr. Slump series is all about. And that's a noble goal. In many regards, it really nailed it, doing Toriyama's source material real justice with the game's delightful visuals, which, trust me, we'll get to that in a bit. But unfortunately, you'll quickly realize that adapting a comedy anime doesn't always make for the most engaging gameplay. You see, the general flow of this game has you running around the town of Penguin Village, talking to friends and villagers, delivering items back and forth, and completing what feel like side quests. All while your main character, Arale, takes the piss out of folks and deals with some pretty ridiculous situations, some of which did get a good laugh out of me. For example, there's this character named Superman with the hiragana for the Su character written on his chest, who, while trying to present himself as a hero, is depicted as a bit of a loser that the town sort of just puts up with, and he's the butt of a lot of jokes. For instance, at one point, another villager, another child robot named Obachaman, realizes he needs a place to live in and, after mistaking Superman's house as being uninhabited, straight up picks up the house and takes it to be his own, commenting, "I can't believe anyone would leave a perfectly good house just laying around like this." I also had a good laugh when it was revealed that Superman's non-superhero name was Clark Kenta for just how ridiculously on the nose it was. And for maybe my favorite bit, there are these policemen who cower in fear of Arale's uncontrollable strength as she repeatedly runs through and destroys their patrol car by accident. There are all sorts of these ridiculous gags, bits, and side characters to be found throughout. You have these aliens that I really liked who sort of look like a cross between Dr. Mario viruses and the Moonanites, who frequently end up in ridiculous situations as they try to figure out how to acquire a spaceship to return home. There's a teacher with an inflated ego and an outrageously large head, an imp that seems determined to literally kill people, an arch-nemesis scientist who naturally fails in all of his schemes, and, well, the list goes on, but my point is, you'll meet a pretty diverse and colorful cast of characters. From a little bit of Googling, it seems like most of these characters aren't exclusive to the game, which means that for any existing Dr. Slump fans, you'll probably get a kick out of seeing your favorite characters throughout the game. And for the rest of us going in blind, these characters feel novel and fresh, which makes it a real win-win in my opinion. Now, hearing all of this, you might think, this all sounds great. But after playing for only a short while, you'll likely make a critical observation, and that is, this game really involves a lot of running around town and talking to people. And don't get me wrong, I can be a patient gamer. I appreciate some good dialogue. I've played my Planescape Torments and my Umanekos. But in this case, this often led to some real pacing issues for me, where many of the chapters felt like they might have overstayed their welcome. The episodic format of the game isn't inherently a bad idea, but I do wonder if maybe the game could have done with a higher number of chapters, but with each being a bit shorter on average. Additionally, since so much of the gameplay consists of dialogue and traversing the town, I'd say that's at least 3/4 of the game, this means the experience can really hinge on the strength of the comedy, the scenarios, and the dialogue. And although I'd mostly give it all a solid thumbs up, with plenty of tongue-in-cheek humor and memorable scenarios, I do think it can still be a little hit or miss at times. Because there are some gags that are just a little too 90s anime for my liking. Things like farting abilities and gags involving nudie magazines, it's a lot of old school anime humor that you're likely already familiar with. Now, some of this may just be a me thing, since my tolerance for this style of humor isn't super high these days. And to give the benefit of the doubt, I do think that the original Dr. Slump series from the 80s may have had a hand in pioneering the style of animated comedy in Japan. Or in other words, it might have been one of the originators of these types of tropes. But regardless, it is 2025 now, and for that, I think it's worth noting that this may not all be for everyone. Outside of running around Penguin Village and chatting with everybody you see, you'll also have your action stages that cap off most of the game's 7 chapters. These are more traditional and what you'd probably expect from a late 90s 3D platformer. They're pretty brief, with most able to be completed in under 10 minutes casually, but provide what I feel is the actual meat of the gameplay. They have all the elements you might expect: jumping across platforms, running through areas, fighting enemies, collecting various items, and so on and so forth. These stages are pretty fun and I think totally competent. They're nothing revolutionary, but they do help to keep you engaged and definitely help with the game's overall sluggish pacing. You'll also have to face a stage-specific boss at the end of each area, though they're mostly pretty simple to fight. There's no crazy attack patterns going on here. And visually, I think they all look pretty fantastic with some very clean modeling and texture work. I think my favorite of the bunch was this giant alien crab guy who you have to beat using this giant laser ability that you only have access to during this battle. And I think it goes without saying that this laser is almost certainly meant to be a reference to Dragon Ball's Kamehameha, which I thought was pretty sweet. Oh, and I've got to give a shout out to this giant chef gorilla guy as well. I really like the way he looked too. One aspect of note is that the game is lacking any sort of manual camera control, which, while this isn't too unusual for this era of gaming, it can result in some areas becoming surprisingly frustrating due to some ambiguous depth perception and some kind of unintuitive aerial momentum for Arale. This wouldn't be as much of an issue if the game wasn't filled with instant death pitfalls, which are strangely unforgiving for this type of game. The extent of the punishment depends on the stage, since some in particular like to set your progress back further than others, but you will find that most of the action stages have some variety of instant death pits baked in. For all the completionists out there, there's also these golden poos for you to collect throughout each stage, which help extend the game's runtime and also provide some nice replay incentive. And the game will be keeping track of these with your completion rate, so you'll have a nice target to shoot for here if you're interested. Throughout the game, your protagonist Arale will be picking up new abilities she learns from other characters via her capture ability, which, considering that she's a robot, I assume is meant to be a nod to the Mega Man games. From some googling around about the rest of the franchise, this also didn't seem to be an attribute that she had in the manga or shows, which further makes me feel that this was meant as a tongue-in-cheek reference. This capture ability will be how Arale learns basically every ability she has for use during the action stages, and to my knowledge, you can't ever really miss any of them. They're pretty much required for progressing. And you'll learn a pretty wide variety of these abilities. You have the abilities you'd expect, like jumping, punching, and crouching, but you'll also get a few more unique ones, like this rolling ability that admittedly might be totally useless, this running barrage of punches a la Luigi in Super Smash Bros., and my personal favorite, this frog jump ability, which besides being pretty useful is also extremely cute. I mean, listen to this noise she makes. One fun bit I'll mention about these abilities is how it seems that many of these mirror that of Mario's in Mario 64. While I'm not trying to say that this was explicitly meant to copy Mario or that she doesn't have her own unique abilities, I will say that her long jump, ground pound, and even tiptoe animation gave me some minor deja vu while playing, amongst a few others. Unfortunately, there aren't any backwards long jump strategies to be found here, at least not yet. I'll also add that for how simple of a thing it is, Arale's colorful celebration that happens whenever she leverages her capture ability may have been one of my favorite parts of the entire game, and it had me light up a bit every time it happened. And while we're on the topic here of our protagonist, in general, Dr. Slump is a game loaded with charm and humor, and a lot of this really does come from our main character, Arale. The game starts off with her Frankenstein-esque creation from Dr. Senbei, who, it's implied, was trying to make a very different type of feminine robot. But what we end up with is Arale, whose main weakness is the fact that she's nearsighted and needs glasses. Even me, having a heart as cold as ice, I found it hard not to love Arale. Whether it be from her goofy animations, her complete naivety when interacting with the townsfolk, her literal earth-shattering strength and physical resilience, or her plethora of catchphrases, Arale really is the star of the show here. Although for that last point, they might be more of catch noises rather than catch phrases. Seriously, she's got a lot of these. Now, as said before, some of her personality can be a bit tropish, but to be honest, it often didn't really matter because she's usually endearing enough to pull the bit off anyway. And again, big credit to HilltopWorks translation here, because for an English playthrough, I definitely think a lesser or lazier translation could have had the game's charm and gags bomb completely, if not end up entirely lost in translation. Some other notable characters include Arale's foster father, Dr. Senbei, who is a bit of a horn dog and is naturally treated as a dying and decrepit skeleton due to being a whopping 28 years old. Oh, and also, he's Dr. Slump. That's Dr. Slump, he's the guy in the title. I just wanted to go ahead and clear that up because this actually wasn't obvious to me. I actually didn't realize this for most of my playthrough. Moving on, there's the aforementioned Obachaman, who was created by an evil villain scientist to rival Arale, as he's been convinced that she's actually trying to conquer the world. Fun fact, if you think he's giving Astro Boy vibes, you'd be right, because according to a Dr. Slump wiki, Toriyama was a big fan of that series, and he modeled Obachaman's hair after its titular character. And to touch on that scientist that created him, there's Dr. Mashirito, who serves as the main antagonist for many of the game's chapters. As you'd expect from this type of character, he rarely serves as a legitimate foil for Arale, and instead usually ends up having his elaborate plans fail or backfire on him spectacularly. He provides both direction for the chapters and some comic relief. It all works well enough. Now, I won't be able to dive into all of the game's characters here, as there's a surprising number of them considering the game's 6 to 8 hour runtime, but I'll just say that for how plotting the game's pacing can be at times, I don't think these characters ever really got old. If anything, I think some of the characters may have ended up a bit underutilized here. Like for instance, midway through the game you have this family from China that lands near your home in what appears to be a spaceship, with some of the family possessing some pretty unique abilities. And while there's sort of a side plot throughout the game of this family trying to get back home, I don't remember there ever being much of a payoff to the story. And that's a bit of a recurring theme here. With the game going for more of an episodic approach, you end up with what feel like a lot of loose ends, and a lot of plot beats that you'd swear are actually meant to be side plots. Like in the 5th chapter, where you spend most of your time in a complicated quest to sell scrubbing brushes to the villagers to raise money for these aliens. Or like how the 4th chapter consists of competing against Obachaman in a series of challenges ranging from quiz games to tests of strength. What I'm saying is that there's not really a full and cohesive story here to discuss, as it's more like a series of smaller episodic stories that often build off of each other with recurring characters and events. It can be a little disorienting at times, but after the first few chapters, I personally realized it was probably best to just not think about it too much and to try and go with the flow of all of it. So, we've talked about the gameplay, the story, and the general flow of the game. But if you've taken a look at this video's title or thumbnail, then you're probably here for the visuals. And holy fuckamole, this game looks great. In my opinion, anyway. Seriously, I love all of this. It's some of the cleanest, stylized, low-poly artwork I've seen on the console. It might sound excessive, but I would honestly describe this look as timeless. It's aged wonderfully, and it looks fantastic when upscaled to higher resolutions, even if I did keep my own settings pretty mild during my playthrough. It's the same sort of style and aesthetic that we know games like Mega Man Legends for, where the models themselves are mostly pretty simple, and most of the detail and shading is baked beautifully into the textures themselves. It's as close to a cartoon or an anime that a PlayStation game can look, and it's a unique style I really feel the world could still use some more of. And for me, these visuals are unquestionably the main selling point of the game, as I really don't think any other aspect reach quite the same heights. Besides just the character models, the Arale sprites in the upper left of your HUD also make for a really nice touch for the presentation. Besides these sprites just looking really good, her face also reacts to what's happening real time in-game like she's some kind of anime girl Doom guy. There are also some other interesting choices that were made in terms of presentation, however. Right next to the character sprites in the HUD, you'll find Arale's pep gauge. This gauge will fill whenever Arale does something good, like showing off one of her new moves to the barbershop owner, or if she just finds a poo. These are kind of a recurring thing. When this gauge fills, you can meet with Senbei and he'll unlock a new invention for you, which can manifest in a variety of ways. Most of the time it'll give you the option of adding a useless but kinda funny HUD element, like a sound gauge or an altimeter for if you're concerned about your current height for some reason, or for if you really just want to cover your HUD in some random bullshit. Sometimes these inventions will unlock new outfits, like this absolutely incredible Michael Jordan basketball jersey. It's a fun little feature that I did appreciate because even though none of these unlockables really affected the gameplay, I still found myself looking forward to whatever random nonsense I was about to gain access to. That being said, I don't think I actually unlocked every invention available, which might be something worth going out of my way to do. But there are some definite flaws in the presentation, and one of them is a very big pet peeve of mine. You see, something I failed to explicitly mention before, but you may have noticed from watching some of this gameplay, is that this game has some significant performance issues, or at least it does when playing with the default settings. And at times, it can be pretty painful. The frame rate frequently drops to visibly low levels, particularly when Arale is using her dash or if there's just a lot being rendered on the screen at once. Some areas are worse than others. I really noticed the problem around the school, while some areas like the barbershop seemed mostly fine. But thankfully I discovered that, when running on an emulator, this can largely be remedied from the settings, or at least it can in DuckStation, which was my emulator of choice. If you locate the settings for the console clock speed, you can increase it by about 20 to 30%, and the game will run significantly better, even if it does still have the occasional frame drop. You might even be able to eliminate these frame drops completely by increasing those speeds further, but I personally wasn't trying to risk the game's stability too much, and kept it around 25% or so for my own sweet spot. I'm gonna have to try adjusting these settings for some more poor performing titles as well, as I imagine this could make something like Kingsfield 2 feel like a completely different game. There are also some other minor graphical issues, mostly just some clipping, but honestly, I'm pretty sure these are just emulator induced. Some of this I was able to fix through some finagling of settings, but some examples, particularly the sunglasses clipping on Kanoko here, I was never able to find a way to fix completely. And I'm not normally at all a stickler for this sort of thing, but for just how good the game looked otherwise, this often stood out to me like a sore thumb. Also, feel free to drop a comment if you know how to fix this. To touch briefly on the game's music, it gets a solid thumbs up from me. It was all totally appropriate and suitable, with some legitimately catchy and lighthearted tunes that ended up stuck in my head for days after finishing. Some tracks you'll be hearing more than others, like this general town theme. Some you'll hear less often, like this almost tropical theme from one of the action stages. But I think my personal favorite track was actually Senbei's lab theme, which I wish I had gotten to hear a bit more of. Otherwise, I wouldn't say there are any major standout tracks here, and I don't think there's a whole lot here I'd listen to in my free time. But as a whole, I think Bandai did a great job with the soundtrack and in making sure that it all fit the vibe they were going for. You get a passing grade, Bandai. No complaints from me here. Now, while I've touched on some of the game's quirks and oddities already, there was one particular design choice that left me scratching my head like no other, and that's the game's navigation system. It's a little unorthodox. Rather than utilizing something like, say, a map screen, the game opts instead for navigating via these signposts that use a sort of branching flowchart system. You can think of each area in the game as belonging to a sort of hidden internal hub, and areas in that hub are only accessible to other areas in that same hub. For example, if you're at the barbershop, you'll have access to your home, the school, and the coffee pot. But if you want to go to, say, the cinema, well, first you'll need to go home, because home will have the police station as part of its hub. Then you go to the police station because the cinema is part of the police station's hub, and then finally, you can go to the cinema. It's a little hard to explain, but in practice this means that you frequently end up having to make intermediary stops at unrelated areas to get to where you're actually trying to go. It's a pretty annoying system, as you end up having to make way more intermediary stops than you'd like when trying to reach your final destination. This is made worse by the fact that you aren't always clearly told where you need to be going or what you need to be doing, and are left to just meander about the town until you stumble upon the next point of interest that the game wants you to find. This whole system certainly isn't a deal breaker or anything, but it is all a bit baffling. My hunch is that they did this in an effort to try and help control the flow of plot progression, to sort of just make sure the player ends up going to certain areas at the right times instead of being able to go just anywhere. But even rationalizing it in that way, it just doesn't seem very good, and really, I wish they had landed on some other form of navigation system here. Another more minor head-scratcher is this little guy you probably noticed hovering around a Raleigh named Gachan, short for Godzilla, which really kicks ass. He joins you kind of randomly at the end of the first chapter and then hangs around for the rest of the game. Now when this little guy joined up, I was interested. I thought, this might make for an interesting twist to the game's dynamic. Maybe he'll allow for some new abilities. I hope he doesn't end up being annoying as so many other partner characters do. Well, it turns out I was wrong on all accounts because he actually doesn't really do anything. Like, I'm not sure if he was ever even addressed by name for the rest of the entire game, besides very occasionally contributing some catch noises to a conversation. He may as well have just not been here at all. His little ass even got in the way of some of my screen capture attempts. I'm gonna assume he probably plays a bigger role in the actual Dr. Slump series than he does here in the game. And really, this was something I began to realize as part of the bigger picture as I progressed through the game. This game is an adaptation of a long-running series, and there's no doubt they were probably trying to play the hits here by including everyone's favorite classic characters. This would explain why we ended up with so many characters whose stories seem to just hit a dead end. Like, what the hell is this dragon even doing here? I'm sure all the longtime Slump fans out there were eating good when they saw all these character inclusions, but unfortunately, I'm not one of those people, at least not yet anyway. But this whole journey has definitely got me wanting to check out some more Slump for myself. Anyway, at this point, I don't know how much more there really is to say, so let's wrap this up and try to put a bow on all of this. Let's answer the question of, should you play Dr. Slump? And the answer is, well, maybe? I mean, the game is solid, if maybe a bit of a novelty in some ways. Looking at the total package, the gameplay is definitely more of an afterthought here, but the overall presentation, eye candy, dialogue, and general charm will, I think, really carry this game for a lot of people. Some of the enjoyment may hinge on your tolerance for classic anime-style humor, and your mileage may vary in that regard. But there's definitely no lack of personality here, even if things can be a bit tropey at times. The game is undoubtedly a visual treat, however, and maybe this is a bit of a spicy take, but I'd personally rank its visuals amongst some of the console's best. But I don't think this is necessarily a game for everyone, and honestly, it isn't even the type of game I'd normally have found myself playing, but if the concept of a playable comedy anime appeals to you, then honestly, this might be one of the best options out there. But if you're looking for more fulfilling gameplay systems, or a stable frame rate, then you may find Dr. Slump a little lacking in some regards. If you are one of those people who thinks this game looks interesting and want to see more of it, then well, I have also chronicled my efforts in trying to obtain the speedrunning world record for the game in a separate upload to this channel, which I'll link in the description. It was an experience that I think let me see the game in a different light when compared to your usual casual playthrough. Anyway, I want to thank all of you again for watching. Feedback is always welcomed and appreciated, so let me know your thoughts on the video and the game, or if you have any other titles you may want to see covered in the future. I've got a small but growing list of games mentioned by commenters already, many of which were totally new to me. Anyway, other than that, hit all the buttons and I will see you guys next time. Peace!